Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the What I've Learned Coaching Female Footy Players series. So I'm Coach Rob Vai, I'm the owner and director of S2S. Today I'm going to be talking about tackling, a vital skill in rugby league. Rugby league is a collision sport. Now, with other sports, there is contact, but collision is different because it requires a whole different element of mental, emotional, and physical preparation. Now, comparing boys to girls, males to females with tackling, a lot of males, a lot of boys when they're younger, they get exposure to rough and tumble, to roughening up, to all this instinctual type of play, whether it's at lunchtime, at school with their mates, when the teacher's not looking on the footy field, whether it's family gatherings, whether it's at different sports that they play, different competitions, the under-13s development, 14s development, Harold Mats, all these different elements of exposure compared to females when we talk about tackling. That is a massive difference between a lot of the females and males that I see, and I'm going to break down why there's such a difference that I've found and what I've learned. Now, I'm going to be breaking down tackling, and one note is that the NRLW, the tackling technique has improved significantly. I am noticing, however, there is a big increase in the amount of catching tackles because of the amount of wrestle that's being implemented. So the front on tackles, they are changing the nature in terms of how they're approaching it, but it's not to worry. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more exposure for their own development as they go on, but we're now peeling it back from NRLW all the way down to those who are just starting, and we're going to look at those who are starting, those in reps, those who are at higher levels, and I'm going to look at how tackling is different for females along that whole trajectory. So just some numbers, a quick stat before we start. In the Harold Mats competition, the tackle efficiency, which is basically the amount of tackles made compared to the amount of tackles missed, was 82% for the males. All right. Now in the same age group of competition at a rep level for Lisa Viola, it was 73% of tackle efficiency, 9% lower, which is to be expected, as I have mentioned the exposure to tackling, but also the opportunities for development, and that's something that I wanted to highlight as in terms of a number to give you. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about is barriers to tackling for female athletes. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone, as I always say, there's a variation between a lot of what the girls game brings, but the disparity is way too hard to ignore in terms of those inexperienced and experienced. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is fear factor of injury. There's also a fear of embarrassment. So sometimes, mainly in the teenage groups, they'll feel embarrassed to be ridiculed. Another thing, they'll feel embarrassed to go 100% and trying too hard in the teenage groups. So when we talk about practicing tackling at training, these are the types of things that you don't see as much with the boys. Being embarrassed of getting it wrong, trying too hard, fear of letting down the coach. I've seen habitual apologies of players getting things wrong. Some players will just say, oh, sorry if I'm giving their feedback or if they get it wrong. And I have to explain to them, like, don't be sorry. Like, this is a learning space. Just apply whatever we're saying to what you're doing and make mistakes if you have to, but you will know whether it's based on effort. Being questioned of their efforts can be quite confronting, especially if they're really trying. So I try and reinforce what they're doing, the correct way of doing it. What's the solution here? What's the solution? Rather than you're constantly doing this wrong, you're constantly doing this wrong, do it better, your effort's not good enough. I try and stay away from that at all costs because it can really diminish their confidence. Okay, next, the mental, emotional and social preparedness. So there are a few terms I've just thrown in there, but if we want to have a look at the boys game, it's quite an expectation that toughness is your quality and defines you as a person. And if you're not tough, you're not playing the game right. And if you're not mentally and emotionally revved up and you're not aggressive and you're not putting your body on the line in contact, then you will be ridiculed. And I haven't had any issues with that. But in terms of toughness in the female space, I can match like for like some female players, whether they are juniors, they're teenagers, they're open women's. I could match them with their toughness for boys. I could couldn't tell them apart in terms of their mental and emotional preparedness. But one thing I find with the new players or players who just haven't found their confidence in their tackling ability, or they're not ready on certain occasions because of different factors like the menstrual cycle, which itself decreases their level of strength, increases level of fatigue, the energy levels change. That's a whole nother consideration that I have to, be mindful of. I look at the players in terms of their mental and emotional preparedness as, okay, well, is this a safe space? Have I built their trust? Is this a cultural expectation? Like, is the culture in the group expected that contact and going 100%, we're not going to ridicule each other? Is it safe for everyone to learn? These are the types of things that I have to set the standard first before thinking about they rock up to footy training, they need to be tough, and I need to point them out when they're not. It's not the case. The boys, it's different. With the females, it's more so like in the players that aren't demonstrating those qualities of wanting to be rough and go 100% all the time. I find it's because the toughness and this roughness is within them, and it's about drawing it out and getting to training and knowing what that is expected of. So I always draw an expectation, okay, when we do tackle, we're going to build into it, but at no point, if I give you a percentage or if I give you a task, if I give you some modification, we don't take it easy. We do it our best. And then we have to build up to 100%, which I'll talk about later. As soon as they find that there's a way to just not try, there are players that I've exposed that I've had to pull them up and say, no, that's not how we do things here. We've got to learn. And now it's about safety. There is massive concussions, massive levels of injuries that come from tackling that everyone knows about. That's the difference I find between males and females. You can't expect them to be going 100% and crazy rough and tough. You've got to bring it out of them. Social expectation. Female players in the teenage A group will have a level of awareness of their peers and what they think. They will sometimes be quite self-conscious about what the others are going to say, whether they go 100%. Give you example, there was this really, really strong girl that was told to run 100% straight, and she did, and she nearly bowled these two girls over in a drill because they didn't expect it. Now, what did the other two girls do? They turned around, they looked at each other like, pfft, and they just scoffed at her. But credit to this girl, teenage girl, she didn't bite back. She didn't care. It was her turn to go again. She went even harder. But then what the other two girls do? Well, they knew that this was the expectation, just based off of what she did. She ran 100% hard, so these girls had to tackle hard. But it's the idea that sometimes players in that instance, if a player goes 100% hard or puts a big shot on, puts a big hit on, you might hear the things like, oh, relax. Oh, whoa, so serious. Why are you going so serious? Like, sometimes in the male space, you'll get ridiculed because you're obviously trying to injure someone, or there hasn't been a go button to go 100% and someone just does it out of nowhere. But some females, if they do go 100%, even when it's expected, I have found that sometimes the other players will sort of look at them in a certain way. Sometimes, not all the time. And they're the ones that I found that I have to work with to say, hey, this is the expectation. Okay, next I'm going to talk about setting the tackle environment. So the environment firstly starts with what is planned for the sessions, which won't be different between the boys and the girls. It's got to be emphasis of repetition, incremental progressions, and even watching the NRL preseason right now, a lot of the videos on social media, they're breaking things down and incrementally progressing things. They're not just jumping out and doing 13 versus 13 every single session. They're focusing on their tackling technical skills and breaking it down there. So that's something that needs to be reinforced, breaking down the tackling technical skills. Next, creating safe environments. So never do I jump into a contact drill going 100%. There's always got to be some lead up work, and I find especially with the girls, they want to build up as well. If we just go straight 100 or straight into just tackling without any pre-work, they'll probably be a bit flustered, depending on, who. If there's high level players who are more confident, that's not so much the case, but a lot with the juniors, that is the case. Now, here's how I guide players to create the clear learning steps when coaching tackling. Number one, break down the body positions first. Body positions is everything in a tackle. If they don't got the right body position, they're going to get bumped off or get stepped. Now, doing it in closed drills, using just only cones or a pole or someone with a pad walking, and then I gradually add the layers and they start jogging. Then I put short distance into longer distances, and then I add a pad, or then I add a ball. So these things are all about making sure it's all broken down, and at each point I'm pointing out exactly what they're doing wrong, because again, not only a safety issue, all these technical parts make a stronger tackle. Next, I look at how I sequence the drills to build up to 100% every single session. There's got to be 100% effort, yes, but how it's played out is going to be in terms of 100% intensity and contact. That's different from effort. I can say go 50% and focus on getting your shoulder in the particular region, but if they're just going half at it, that's not what I asked for. I didn't ask for you to rip their head off. It's about 100% effort on the technique rather than 100% intensity into a tackle. I make it clear when it's time to go 100%. I gather everyone around and I explain the expectation that I would have set right at the start. And then we go from there. I stop the drill and reset it. If a player doesn't go 100%, I'll have to say, no, we've got to start again. And mainly it's a safety issue, but it also reinforces the expectation, or I'm not going to ridicule you and punish you in front of the group, but everyone expects you to go 100%. Let's do it at 100%. So I started again, whether it's a mini game or whatever it is. So it's really important to reinforce what 100% means, because again, injury is the number one concern. Okay, I'm going to talk about big technical considerations for tackling now. So the number one biggest issue with any tackler in the junior system, whether they are boys or they are girls, is tracking. I have spoken about it many times, how rugby league is played like a game of bull rush. Player will get the ball, and not only will their attacking skills reflect bull rush by just running left and right, but the defenders will be the same. They'll get stepped, they'll get caught in the mud, they'll get pulled over and pushed over based on what their attacker's doing. This is the biggest area that I have been focusing on as of late, and I've found it's made a huge impact in the overall game technique with their tackling, not just working on the same principles every time. I've made tackling as a very important part of our program. The common issue is that players sink into the ground and then they get stepped. So what do I teach players? So here are the biggest ways to avoid getting stepped. All right, it's called going straight, being steady, and your feet have to be steady. Your head can't bobble up and down. If you see a player doing this, they're jumping up and down, they're most likely going to be stepped. And the last thing I say is don't guess where they're going. Let them move and you follow. Sounds so simple, but this is what I work on heavily with constant repetition and progressions with these things in our programs. And I've seen they're so much calmer when they're tackled. They're so much more leveled, so much more centered. They feel closer to the ground, like they can make a movement rather than get stuck in the mud or be up in the air and get stepped. So tracking is huge, and I've learned from a lot of different coaches about tracking. Okay, the next one, left shoulder tackles. They are a big kryptonite for a lot of players. 90% of the world is right-handed. So more often than not, the left hand is going to be the non-dominant hand. And more often than not, their left shoulder is going to be weaker than their right shoulder in terms of their technique, in terms of their strength, in terms of their approach to a tackle. They have less confidence. And I find this because in the female game, I see it all the time, whether it's coaching, whether it's watching a game, even in the NRLW, I see this so many times. Players will favor a player who's coming across to tackle, this is my right, with their right shoulder and turn in, and then risk themselves that injury and not have an effective tackle. But NRL, they have been drilled and have hours and hours and hours of practice. It is an expectation. Left shoulder and right shoulder should be split down the middle in terms of their confidence and ability, but they'll obviously have a favored one, right? But it's about having evenness and repetition on both and confidence on both. The next one is tackling with hands. So A lot of the times I see players, they'll grab or they'll use their hands as a defense mechanism to protect them, a protection mechanism. So what I try and avoid is players grabbing at all. Number one, do not grab. It's always shoulder first. So I give them ping pong balls or golf balls, because tennis balls, they're too big and we want the balls to be small enough so they can grasp it, hold on tight. So I'll probably prefer golf balls because of this, because they can crack the ping pong balls. And then I get them to squeeze tight. All right, it's not about grabbing and trying to hook them. It's about squeezing their arms really tight and then maneuvering them after the tackle. Okay, the next one, teaching body shapes. The big three critical areas that I have found have had biggest influence when coaching tackling is focusing on these three areas. Number one, the feet are the foundation. I spoke about the feet with tracking, the feet with being stepped. The feet is everything, because the feet produces the power in terms of how your motion is, and it's more so the legs, but where your feet are positioned, that's super important, and that can influence a lot of other things. The next thing is where the hips are. I try and avoid terminology saying, all right, step, dip, because dip, you sometimes see players, they'll just put their head to the floor. Instead, I say step, crouch. So crouching is a better terminology for them to use, to crouch under the ball. And so how does that work with the hips? Well, the hip hinge type of movement and the hip region is quite a complex area to have players build internal cues. That's why hip hinge is a very difficult thing to teach compared to all other movements inside the gym. So next is the shoulder and the head. So the shoulder is connected to the head, and I say this region here, this is every part of here has to be in contact with the attacker. This is where you tackle here. All right, you don't tackle here, you don't tackle here, you tackle in the middle, right on that shoulder collarbone area, because players' heads a lot of the time in the girls' game, they will tackle like this. They'll move their head to the side. Their head needs to be latched onto the hip, and reinforcing that there needs to be a closed tightness. And we heavily drill these three things in our programs and make sure that players have a full understanding of those three regions. Another thing I like to avoid, I don't like using the word square. Square is not a good term, I have found. Teaching what is square, all you need to say is you need to say straight and front on. Like square, that's a shape. I don't find that square is effective for me because I've had to teach players what square actually means, and I don't use that term unless they know what it means and I can refer to it. One thing I do avoid is getting them to hold the pad like this. I always tell them hold the pad on their stomachs. Otherwise, if they don't, they're going to have a big barrier between them and it's a bit harder for them to tackle. Whereas the boys, you can hold it like that and they're confident enough to get themselves in and tighter in the tackle. I find the diamond pad is quite useful. Another thing with the girls is that I avoid cones because sometimes they get afraid to step on it and the fear of breaking it sometimes. Instead, I use dots. So I use rubber dots, and the rubber dots really help and allow them to understand where to step on or use the dots, so they're not afraid to get tackled and to step onto it or land on it. All right, so I've just shared through a lot of the lessons that I've learned coaching and teaching tackling, and I feel like I've only just got to the surface of it. But in regards to, actually how the tackle technique is programmed, implemented, they're all the things that I include in what I do. I make sure I take full pride and full assurance that every player that comes into our program has improvement, and I make sure that all the things that I'm trying to implement to them, they can always retell it back to me. I always tell them at the end of coaching and training them, I'll say, all right, what did we learn? We just did tracking. Tell me, what are 2 things about tracking? And I'll make sure every player understands, because the great coach John Wooden has once said, you haven't taught until they have learned. Anyways, that's episode 3. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll be bringing out episode 4 shortly. If you have any questions, comments, put them down below. Let me know what's your experience with coaching tackling. Is it different between boys and girls for you? What do you find different? Put it in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.